there were times I used to ask myself, how in the world did you get into this?
Mm-hmm.
Believe
Yeah.
you me. And traveling with two children by yourself, because I had no help whatsoever. I had to
Yeah.
deal with both of them being so young.
Yeah.
And but I also began to realize later on what a great thing it was for me, because otherwise I would never have been able to see the world if I had not gone through this. And I got a
Exactly.
chance, and I got a chance to see so much. And not only that, so did my children.
So today I am interviewing my mother-in-law, which you'd be like, wow, really? But yeah, really. And the reason for my desiring to interview my mother-in-law is because my mother-in-law was born in, I believe, 1935 in the South, in Virginia, eldest of 8 children, Black female. So now that she's in her mid 80s and, life is what it is, it was my desire to sit down with somebody who, like herself, has lived a lot of life, has seen a lot of life, has been, uh, uh, told what I think in certain times of her life and what she could and couldn't do. And I just thought it was a super important during Women's History Month, and just as my mother-in-law, and as a female, and as a Black woman, the importance of having conversations and connecting with her through these conversations and questions I desire to ask her and hear what she has to say. Because I think that it will turn out to be something of value for others to hear. And I look forward to you joining me. So sit tight. Here we go. JT, good morning or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me.
Well, it's a good thing that you called me and reminded me, because I wouldn't want to miss this, believe me.
Well, it means a lot to me that we're doing this, frankly. And in my intro, you'll hear it, of course. But I was talking about, who you are. You're my mother-in-law, and the year you were born, which I believe is 1935. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you're the eldest of 8 children?
Yes, eldest of 10 children.
10 children. I don't know why I got 8. 10 children.
Yeah. Well,
and
there were 2 stillborn. That's why.
Okay. All right. Well, that's why. And born in Virginia.
Uh-huh.
And, also what I mentioned was, here we are, Women's History Month, and being a woman, being a Black woman, being born in the South as a Black woman in the US in the 30s, and your story, and why to me it's so important to share this story, your story, because I think we don't hear enough of these stories, frankly, and the importance of what is taking course in life, and how important it is to know your history, and how important it is to honor women like you who have come before, women like myself and women younger than both of us, and the lessons that can be learned from the experiences that you can share. So I want to start with, again, thanking you and asking you personally, as a little girl growing up in Virginia, what was your experiences and what did you see and what inspired you to and what did you want to do as a little girl? What did you hope and dream about?
As a little girl growing up, I learned to read at an early age, and as I continued to read and find out things outside of the environment which I was in, I always wanted to travel. But before I got up to that, I always wanted to be a doctor. That was my dream, and that was what I was got from when reading books and reading stories. And then I wanted to travel, and it was a dream because at that time at my age, it was no possible way that that could happen. But that was the dream that I had.
And you say it was no possible way because of economics, because of us humanity. What were your reasons for saying that?
It was my reasons for saying that because, first of all, the little town that I lived in, even I knew that after I finished school and would finish school, that it would be, first of all, let me go back. The idea to finish school was one, it was an idea because it was hard to finish school at that particular time.
And when you finished school, were you able to go through high school? Were you able to finish? What grade did you succeed to achieve?
Let me go back to the day that I finished school. When I graduated from high school, because I graduated from high school in the 11th grade. That was back in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And I there were ladies who used to come down to our county, and they would be recruiting young women to go up north to work during the summer months for the families in the north. And I was one of them that was chosen. And I left home the very next day and went to Asbury Park, New Jersey, to work for a family.
Wow. I had
I
no idea you did that.
Yes, ma'am. I went the very next day after I graduated. I went to Asbury Park. That was the first time that I had ever even been out of the state. And I became so homesick. I cried for 2 whole weeks. And when you're a crybaby and you're crying, you can't do anything. So I wasn't a choice. Okay. So the lady finally decided that she didn't need me. She needed someone who could work and take care of her children. So, needless to say, I came back to Virginia. Okay.
Wow. So you were gone for 2 weeks because you were so homesick and because you couldn't stop crying. She returned. She said, I need somebody else to replace you,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
basically sent you back home. How did that make you feel?
To be honestly truthful with you, I was so glad to get back home. I really and truly it didn't bother me at all.
Oh, that's
But
amazing.
yeah,
That's amazing because everybody can have a different feeling. I mean, obviously you were homesick, but you could have taken on other feelings. You could have taken on guilt. You could have taken on, failure. But that's great that you
uh-uh,
didn't. And then
uh-uh.
what happened? So you went back home, and now you graduated from high school. And what did you want to do at that moment in time? Like, did you want to go for more education? Was it even possible? Was that something that was even an option for you or talked about?
Well, once I got back home, and I had been back home for about a month, that's when I got past being homesick. I I began to get that idea in my head that I wanted to travel. I wanted to be away from my home because, first of all, the only work that I could get in my hometown. I remember I lived in a little county in Virginia called Charles City County, And the only work for a young woman like me was working in the plantations. And that's where I had worked, because I worked while I was in high school. I worked my way through high school. And I had to, and I knew that was what I was going to have to be going back to. And that was also something that I did not want to go back to. So I just got past the homesickness, but I also got the desire again to fulfill my dream about getting away from Charles City and going somewhere else. And I found out about the Army. That's when I made the decision to go into the Army because, let's see, that I graduated in 53, and in 54, I went into the U.S. Army. The first time I went to the recruiting office to take the test, I went to go to the Navy, but the test was 100 questions and you had 10 minutes to answer them. And of course, I didn't pass it because I didn't have enough time. And so I did not pass at that particular time. But back then, you had 30 days, and then you could go back to the recruiting office and sign up again. And I went back to the recruiting office in 30 days, and I signed up for the Army. But in the meantime, when I went back home and did not pass the test for the Navy, I went back home and I told everybody that I had already joined the military. That was not a good thing to do, but I did it. But
you were speaking it into existence.
Yes, I was. Because the next 30 days when I went back, guess what? I passed the test for the military and I went into the Army. And that was at the time when the women we were called WAC, Women's Army Corps.
And I there's so many questions I have to ask you, JT. I want to go back just for a second regarding being raised around the plantation and working on a plantation as a young girl, and when you went back initially before you officially, I think, got accepted into WAC. What were your responsibilities on the plantation, may I ask?
Honey, to do everything possible. And my biggest thing was cleaning. And I learned to iron. I did a whole lot of ironing on the plantations. Most of them uh, making up the beds, they use pure linen bed clothing, which had to be ironed. And they would be so heavy. They always had to be we had to they were starched, as a matter of fact, and you had to wet them down. As a matter of fact, I would wet them down and put them in the refrigerator and then take them out and iron them on an ironing board. And the first place I worked at was where we lived, Westover, which was right down the road. We lived on the plantation, and they had an outhouse outside of the house itself, that we call it the big house, which used to be the kitchen for the that Westover for the house. And they had set it up as an ironing room for me. And I ironed and I cleaned silver and I did everything that needed to be done as far as housekeeping is concerned.
So it's interesting because I think many people think of a plantation and they associate it with the 1800s. They associate it with civil, like Civil War. They associate it with the freeing of slaves. They associate it with all these kind of historical moments in time. But that's 1860s. Now we're talking 1950s, nearly 100 years later, 90 years later. And you're referring to it as a plantation. So when people hear this and they go, wait a minute, what was how in the sense of as a home that was a plant, I assume then it was a plantation during the Civil War era and had. Is this correct that you
Yes.
use the terminology?
Yes.
So 90 years later, what were they doing that they were still referring to themselves as a plantation?
Because they are still referred to as plantations. Okay, because they did have slaves. As a matter of fact, Westover plantation, which was the first place that I worked and lived, first plantation I lived on. And it was right on the James River. It's right
Mhm.
on the James River, and there was a tunnel under the ground there where the slaves used to escape and the ships, because it would be ships that would come down the river, come down James River, and the slaves would get on these ships and escape. So
Mhm.
that's what that's because that's what it was all about at that particular time. It was just modernized at the time when I worked there, and it was just waiting on people doing what needed to be done for them.
And waiting on the family that owned this plantation for
Waiting on the,
generations and
right.
generations and generations.
Yes, ma'am. Waiting on them. That was it.
And so they were just landowners who raised what? Cotton, or what did they, what gin,
They,
what did they do that
okay,
their plantation was active?
there were different families that lived on the plantation, but of course, all of those who lived on the plantation and in the houses that were built on the plantation, they were the ones, they were white, and
Yeah.
they ran the plantation. They did
Mhm.
farming because they had orchards, they did farming and the whole nine jobs.
Mhm.
And me as a child, and there were others. There was the cook, but now the cook was black, of course. That was me. There were other people in the house that were working, taking care of the house, because you have to understand the house was huge, and
Yeah.
the house is set right on the river, and it
Yeah.
was absolutely huge. And there were grounds people who kept the grounds and all. But all of us, every person that was there to work to take care of the plantation. But
Right.
those who lived, we lived in a little old house. There was a little old house that we lived in on the plantation, but it was totally different, built differently from the other houses for the what they call the groundskeepers and the people who ran the farm.
So all the people that you worked for were white. Were all the people who worked for the whites, were they black?
They were black. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. That's for that.
Okay.
Mhm.
So that was your upbringing until you were about 17, I think,
Yes,
right?
that was until I was seven. That's right. When I went to go into the military, I was 18.
Correct. Yeah. I
Mhm.
figured you had to have been 18. So
Yeah,
you go into, so you get accepted into WAC. And 1954, getting accepted in WAC, even though in the 40s and what have you, in World War II, women worked for the military, and just because of because of all the men being away and all the things that happened. But now you're in WAC, which is still really quite amazing because of just the time period when
uh-huh.
it came to being accepted. What did that then mean? Where were you going to be based? Where did you go? What happened from there?
Guess what? Fort Lee, Virginia, which was 11 miles from where I lived. Okay, that was my training ground. That's where I trained. And we had a ferry. We used to go across there to go to the little place called the Hopewell in Petersburg. Okay,
Yeah.
but but when I got accepted into the military, and my mother first of all did not want me to go in. She held up on it, but it was a young lieutenant who came down to the house and talked to her and told her the advantages it was going to be for me. But
Yeah.
and finally that day when she left, she made arrangements for me. I took the Greyhound bus I had to go through Richmond and then come back down to Petersburg to get to Fort Lee, Virginia, which was exactly 11 miles from my home across the river.
How long did you then train in the Army?
I trained 2 months. I was in training.
And then what happened?
I was transferred because when did a test, they did testing on you to see what type of work you could do, what your position would be. And I came out, don't ask me how they figured this one out. I could either learn how to type or I could be a cook. Okay. So guess what? They said that I could go to school for typing. So they transferred me to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I went to school there. I went to typing school in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And thank God for that. I had been in Fort Knox. I had gone there and worked one summer, as a matter of fact, taking care of this lady, their family, taking care of their children. That was just before I left home to go back to the military, to go to the military.
Wow. So you end up in Kentucky, and you end up being a part of WAC and being trained as a typist.
Right.
How long were you there for?
I was there for another 2 months.
So these were like shorter stints of training time. And then
Right.
what did they do? Align you with, then what happened?
And then after I finished typing school, guess what? They shipped me to San Antonio, Texas. Okay. I ended up at Brooke Army Medical Center there at the hospital. That was one of the biggest burn hospitals in the United States.
Wow.
And guess what? My position there was I worked on the women's general medicine ward as a ward clerk.
Amazing, JT. I had no idea about this, and how cool that your interest in medicine and your interest to travel, even though Texas is in Italy, but it's certainly the other side of the country compared to Virginia.
Well,
so
yeah.
You were starting to shift and move, but the fact that you were part of women's health, the fact that you were engaged, in traveling, you were doing something that was going to get you up and out and give you purpose. In the 50s, as a woman, as a Black female, and I hate to even have to put that into the sentence, but you know better than I, just all the things you were up against. I certainly heard it from my mother, what she was up against, and you both were basically approximately the same age. I think she's 1 year older than you. Just the challenges that you women were up against during that time of life. So San Antonio, you get brought to San Antonio, and then what took course from there?
I worked there. I stayed there. I was in San Antonio. Let's see. I'm trying to remember, because I worked there. I remember the first time I got sick. I was at work one day and I fell over and they caught me before I hit the floor, and I had to have an operation. As a matter of fact, they operated on me that very same night.
And what happened to you?
I had appendicitis.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I had appendicitis, and they sent me back home. Once I got they sent me back home to recuperate, and they traveled then. The only way that the military the only transportation that they used for traveling was by train or boat. And that's how I got there. I got there on the train on Sunset Limited.
From Virginia to San Antonio?
From Kentucky to San Antonio.
Kentucky, right.
Yes, to San Antonio. And then when I got sick, and like I said, I got out of the hospital. They kept you in the hospital for quite a while you were recovering.
Right.
But I still couldn't go back to work. So what they did was they sent me back home. But they sent me back home on a train.
Oh my gosh.
That was a horrible experience because when I left San Antonio to go back home, I had to go through Louisiana, and I missed my connecting train in Louisiana. And so I had to stay overnight. But the next day when I got up to get to train to go to Virginia, I ended up on what you call it was not what am I? It was like a cattle car.
Wow.
That was one of the worst experiences in my life, but I had to endure it because I had to get home, and they would
Yeah.
pick. Uh-huh. But I endured it, and I got home, and I stayed at home for about a month before I went back and was put back on duty. And then
That
I worked, and then in the meantime, I met my children's father. I met my
while you were back in Virginia or
No, no,
in
no.
Texas?
When I got back to Texas, I met him. Uh-huh. And
And go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, and we eventually ended up getting married. But back then, when you got married, you could not stay in the military. You had to get out. But I knew everybody in the personnel office. Okay, as a matter of fact, I knew everybody on the base. If you want to know the truth, that was one thing that I made sure that I did. And the girl, a friend of mine that worked in the personnel office, she kept putting my paperwork, taking it out of the box for the captain to sign it and putting it away. And it went on for
Oh,
that went on for months. And finally, one day, my husband asked me. He said, "Didn't you put in for your discharge?" So, needless to say, I stayed in for quite a few months.
amazing. Amazing. And I'm sure, technically that benefited you, even though it wasn't considered kosher, I'm sure.
No,
But clearly people adored you and wanted to give you the benefits. So you got married in what, like 1955-ish?
I, uh, I got married in Felicia. I have to go back and remember that one. Okay.
Well, I figured that
Because
would
I was
have
in,
to be
yeah,
within that time frame.
yeah, 'cause I got out of I got married, and I didn't get out until 50, I got out in 56.
And your firstborn is a 56 baby.
He's a fixed. Randy was born in 56. Uh-huh. Yes, because he was born at he got out. He was born before I got out.
Oh,
Uh,
really? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
no, I was out. 'Cause I was already out before he was born. I was out, but what I was trying to say, he was born at Lackland Air Force Base. That's what it was. Because I was still in Texas, because I lived off base. But the thing of it was, when Jerry and I got married, and we couldn't find a place to live, so he was in the Air Force at Kelly Air Force Base, and I was at Fort Sam Houston. So the only time we would see each other would be on the weekends. We didn't
Oh,
see.
wow.
We didn't see each other during the week at all. It was just on the weekends. And then when I got pregnant with Randy, that's when I was out of the military then. And we finally found a little old apartment to live in. And let's see, and then because I have to go back and remember that part, because I stayed in Texas. I'm trying to remember, because I cried when I first got pregnant. I
Yeah.
cried just about every day. Okay,
Yeah.
it was. I don't know whether my hormones were out of place or what happened, but I cried
Yeah.
every day. And but finally, eventually, Jerry got orders. No, we lived off of the base. That's where it was. We found an apartment because that's when I made some friends
Hmm.
with some friends that Jerry knew, as a matter of fact. And then uh, I got pregnant with Kathy. That was what it was. That after that, because the children, they were born close together.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And I had cried so much when I was carrying Randy, Jerry told me, he says, look, I'm not going through this, because he used to have to get up and go to work, and I would keep him up all night long by crying. So when I got pregnant with Kathy, and he knew he was getting ready to get orders to go overseas, he told me, he said, you're going to have to go to Virginia and stay with your mother until Kathy is born. And that's just what happened. And I did. I went home. Kathy was born in Virginia for that reason, because he couldn't take it. And which I understood, because like I said, I used to keep him up at night. I would cry all night long, and I'd sleep all day, and he was at work. But then after that, he got orders to go overseas. And that's when I was in Virginia at the time, because I had to wait for him to get us housing. So I stayed in Virginia, and I used to travel back and forth to his mother, because his mother lived in Philadelphia. But the children and I used to travel back and forth to visit his mom. And then the time finally came for him to go overseas. And we still did the traveling back and forth from Virginia to Philadelphia until such time that he got housing. When he got housing was when we went over, and we went to England. We went to Mildenhall, England. That was the first place that we went to in England. I mean, in overseas.
And then you went from England to Germany after that?
We lived in England for a year, because my husband, he was in security. He was in the Air Force, and he was in security. And then we stayed in England for a year. And then we transferred from England to Germany. But we didn't know, because of the fact that he had a 3-year time that he was supposed to spend overseas, because of the fact that we were transferring to another base, we weren't sure if we were going to have to, spend a longer time. So we decided to come back to home for a few days. And we made the trip. We came back home and stayed at home for a week. And it took us a week to get back. When we got ready to go back to England, to transfer from England to Germany, it took us a whole week to get back. And the children were very young then. And I missed my first flight because I had to leave out of Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I missed my first flight because I stayed with my mother-in-law in Philadelphia. And I had to call Jerry to tell him that I had missed my first flight. And then the Air Force had to set me up for another flight. But eventually we got the flight out and we got to England. And like I said, we stayed in England for a whole year. And but when we got back and we were transferring to Germany, we drove from from England to Germany.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We took the ferry from the Hook of Holland, and we had to put the boat, because we had to take a ferry to go across the Hook of Holland, and we put the car on the ferry, and drove from there to Germany. And I'll never forget, that was quite a trip. But when we got to the German border, I was the only one who had a passport. Jerry was traveling on orders. He had orders from the military. He wasn't required to have a passport, and neither were the children. The only thing I had to have for the children was birth certificates. We got held up at the border to go into Germany. We had to get in touch with the American embassy so that they could give the people there the permission to let us through, because Jerry wasn't required to have a passport. But that was quite a trip. And not only that, I digressed a little bit. Let me go back. On our way back from Virginia, from the time that we went to visit and back, we got a chance to go and stay in Paris, France. Okay. And we got a chance to cross the English Channel on a ferry to get back into England. Right. And that's why it took us a whole week to do that. And I'll never forget, we had run out of money. Okay. But my husband's paycheck was waiting for him, because we got to London. We landed in London when we got across the channel, and had to take a taxi from London I mean, from London to Mildenhall, which was 80 miles away.
Oh, wow.
And my husband had to, talk to the driver, tell him, look, I will be able to pay you, but you will have to take me so I could get my paycheck. And after all of that experience, the children, they were just so glad about it. The first thing they asked, when are we going to do this again? I told her, I think you have lost your mind. I hope we never, ever have to do this again. Believe me.
Well,
So,
it's funny because you actually manifested the kind of things, maybe not specifically how you imagined it to be, but you definitely were given opportunities to do the things that you dreamed of doing from the time you were a little girl, and you couldn't have been more than your early 20s at that point. And here
yep.
you had created all the things. I mean, I don't know that marriage and children were a part of that vision.
No, they weren't.
Well, and and going back to just when you were carrying the babies, when you were pregnant, I mean, I'm sure hormones had something to do with it, but here's my question too. As a woman, when you find out you're pregnant, I think women go through all sorts of emotions, no matter how much they want to have children or not. I think it's a scary thing. And I think it's a scary thing to all of a sudden we have this realization that now what? Now what do I give up to get? Now it's not about me. Not to mention you're also a female married who's in the 50s. Now you had to give up your career in the army. Now you're pregnant. Now you're with this man who initially you didn't even get to spend time with. Now you're going through this a little bit of an arduous traveling with family and all the things. And that's got to be a lot to be like going through your brain at different times, not because you don't believe, not because you're not thankful, not because you're not happy, but just there's a lot of realities that you're up against. And what went through your head during those times?
Well, I tell you what, there were times I used to ask myself, how in the world did you get into this?
Mm-hmm.
Believe you me. And traveling with two children by yourself, because I had no help whatsoever. I had to deal with both of them being so young.
Yeah.
And, but I began to realize later on what a great thing it was for me, because otherwise I would never have been able to see the world if I had not gone through this. And
Exactly.
I got a chance to see so much. And not only that, so did my children.
Yeah.
And the kids, when we transferred to Germany, the kids learned how to speak German, but I never did.
Yeah.
But I was able to go out in the marketplace and shop, and all I had to do was point at something, because the children had learned how to speak the language, and they could do the interpretation for me in order for me to be able to purchase it.
Amazing.
So, it was truly, truly amazing. It really was, but it was a great experience. And not only that, come to find out, one of my oldest brother had gone into the military, and he was stationed in Germany, and got a chance to even visit with him at that particular time.
Wow.
Yes.
That's really pretty great. Especially again, we're not talking the 2000s. We're not talking about the 21st century. We're still talking, I mean, it's 21st century, but we're not talking about the 1950s. You haven't even gotten to 1960 yet, have you?
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a big deal on so many levels, that somebody hearing that today, forgive me, but if they're under the age of 40 or 50 years old, have no idea, including myself, because this is still I know only from history lessons and conversations with generations above me and my family, but it's one thing to, again, like I said, be a woman. It's another thing to have gone through life being discriminated potentially against, no matter where you are in the world, whether you're a woman, you're Black, whatever. Now you're a mother, a wife, and you're, traveling, and you're doing things that really, I mean, JT are unbelievably incredible, and really, really was like really courageous.
It was. And Felicia, one thing, even going back to when I was a young girl coming up and working in the plantations, that I learned so much, and I learned how to do so many things that I would never have learned how to do. And then I learned there were so many things that I would not have even thought about acquiring or getting unless I had seen these things with my eyes. And it developed in me that I wanted something better than what I had as I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to work and strive to obtain that. But I learned to keep house. I learned how to keep a house.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really learn to cook because the family that I cooked for, I came from a family. I lived with my grandparents raised me, and we ate strictly from the garden, and we ate unhealthy foods because that's what we raised. We raised our foods and whatnot. But I cooked for families who didn't cook that way, and so
Yeah.
I learned another way to cook, but not to really cook like my family I was used to.
Yeah.
And so I learned so many things from those places that I worked, because Westover was not the only place that I had worked at. I worked at the place called Sherwood Forest, which was the home of John Tyler, President John Tyler, because the road that runs through Charles City down used to be Route 5. Now it's called the John Tyler Highway. I worked at that plantation.
So there were 3 plantations that you worked at total?
It was Berkeley, Sherwood Forest, and then it was Westover. And then even when I was in the military, my aunt worked at one of the plantations called Wine Oak. And when I would go home on leave, because I would try to go home on leave as much as I could, I would even go down there and work with her at the time that I was at home. And the lady, Mrs. What I can't remember her name, but she would, and when I would go down there to work with my aunt, she would want to talk to me. So I would be sitting up in her sunroom talking to her while my aunt would be downstairs, because my aunt did the cooking there, cooking. And she used to say, "I don't believe this." You are supposed to be here helping me. And Mrs. I can't remember Mrs. I can't remember her name now, but she would always take me upstairs in her sunroom and talk to her. And we just developed a relationship, because she thought it was amazing too that I was in the military and I was traveling, but I really wasn't traveling, because once I got to San Antonio, I didn't travel anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Until you, of course, went overseas. But,
Mhm.
obviously she recognized in you a young woman who was striving for greater, not even knowing how to make that path necessarily happen, but you just kept going forward, and not with like probably such conscious like drive, but an unconscious drive as well as a conscious drive. Like things happened for you as well as you made things happen for you. And through the combination of those efforts and those things that became realized, did things manifest into, again, probably some of the things that you thought you dreamed for, wanted to create, and got a little bit more than even that. But, you know, and ironically, it's the old adage, be careful what you ask for because you just might get it.
Yes.
You know, like your right, like your first job going to Jersey and then being homesick for 2 weeks and being sent home, and you know, who's to say if, you know, you'll never know what, it doesn't matter either, by the way, if you had stayed there, how life would have changed.
Right.
It's
Right.
irrelevant.
It's
It's irrelevant. It was supposed to happen for the reasons it happened. And so then, did you guys stay in Germany for several years?
We stayed in Germany for 2 years, yes, and then we came back to the States, and that's when the problems began. I had some problems before I left Germany. I had thought about really coming back to the States before before the time was up, but I made this decision. I said, you know what? I might never ever have this opportunity to travel abroad again. So I'm going to stay here. And I did the job in Germany. I was what they call a bus mommy. We had the children taking the kids back and forth to school in order to keep the driver from having to deal with the disciplining of the children and whatnot. We worked as bus mommies. And that's what I worked as a bus mommy, taking the kids to school and then going back and picking them up. And I did that the whole time I was in Germany. Plus, I used to work at the hospital. I used to do volunteer work at the hospital, going in and taking reading books to the people, military people who were in the hospital and whatnot. I even worked on the flight lines of families who were coming in. Their husbands were already overseas, and the wives were coming in with their children, and I would babysit with the children while the wives went through customs. I just was a person who I just did these kinds of things, and I mean I just enjoyed every moment of it, and I was so thankful that I did decide to stay in Germany because, believe it or not, I never got a chance to go back. But guess what? Both of the kids have been able to travel back abroad.
No, and that I get, and again, I think that, you know, probably you planted that seed in them, but more to the point of the things that you've described and what people wouldn't know until they hear your story. And what I know of you is you were also planting the seeds for what I refer to as a servant leader, like where you are of service to others because you are a caring, nurturing person. You do love people. You do take those initiatives. You still take those initiatives in your church, in your community. And going to that space. So we're now talking about like what, 1960, 61? Where are we at in the year of you coming back to the States?
When we got back to the States, come to find out that my mother-in-law had had a stroke.
And what year was this?
That was it was back in I can't remember. I'd have to go back and look it up, but that was after we had spent those 3 years abroad. And when we came back, we went back. We got to Philadelphia because we had the car shipped back with us, but it had been shipped to New York. So we stayed in Philadelphia until my husband went and picked up the car. But his mother had had a stroke, and she was still recovering, and she really and truly hadn't gotten the right. She hadn't had the right treatments that she needed for her to recover as fast as she should have.
Yeah.
And so I told my husband, I said, you know what, because that's when we were going back to Texas. When we came back to the States, we went back to Texas. And I told him, I said, your mom needs to go with us. I said, and I will take the responsibility of taking care of her and seeing that she gets everything that she needs to recover. And he was bitterly against it. I just kept talking to him and saying, she is your mom. She is my mother-in-law. and we
Mm-hmm.
need to take her. So
Mm-hmm.
we stayed in Philadelphia because he had to find us housing before I could go back to Texas. So sure enough, it happened that he found us housing, and when I went back to Texas, she went with us, and that's when the problems began
With you and Jerry?
with me and Jerry. Yes, but I had found a job, and guess what? I found a job doing. I did practical nursing in a children's hospital. I did practical nursing in a children's tuberculosis hospital.
Oh, wow. So
Yes,
now this is in the early 60s that you're doing
that,
this.
I was doing that.
Kennedy is the president of the United States, right? During this
Yeah,
time?
yeah. Let's see. Was it Kennedy? Yeah, Kennedy was, and who came after Kennedy? Because yeah, because it was
Johnson came after Kennedy when he got
Kennedy.
assassinated in Dallas.
Okay, and then it was Carter. Okay, yeah, because I have to stop and think about all the things that happened in between. But yeah,
Right.
Kennedy, yeah, because I was working at the hospital. I was working at the hospital the day that Kennedy was shot, because I was right across the street from the Brooks Air Force Base, and I was we got the news, and we all stood out. Everybody just went out and just stood on the highways and just cried over what that situation, that what had happened.
And you were
Yes,
in San Antonio.
I was in San Antonio. Yes, and then I began to train while I was at the hospital. I trained to be a practical nurse back then. It was practical nursing, and I learned to give medications the whole 9 yards. But I had to, a lot of times had to work 16-hour shifts. And in the meantime, I was getting a ride to work because I didn't have a car. Jerry had the car, but I didn't have a car. And one of his friends his friends was stationed at he was stationed over at Brooks Air Force Base for a while, and he used to, because when I went on the night shift, I would have to have a transportation to get to work, and he used to take me. But the situation got so bad that Jerry came to pick me up one morning because I was on the night shift. I was on what used to call the 11 to 7 shift. That's when the situation happened, that he
Mm-hmm.
had packed up his clothes in the car. And when he picked me up and took me back home, he went to the base and he never came back home that day after that.
And so, JT, when that was all going down, I mean, what was the demise of the relationship? Was it a lack of communication? Was it somebody being selfish? Was it abuse? Was it like, what was going on, if I may ask, that destroyed your marriage in your heart?
It was his relationship with another individual.
So he was having an affair, sadly, and so
Mhm.
he wasn't even in the marriage with you because he was doing something else.
Something else, yeah.
And did that start before you came back to the States, or did that start?
No, but it was going on when we were overseas. But like I said, that was one of the things that I told you I was thinking about leaving and coming
Yeah,
back. But
yeah,
I made the decision, no, I was not going to do it. I was going to stay there for the full term, which I did, because like I said, it was in the back of my mind. I might not ever get a chance to
right.
be here again. So I stayed. But I think what pushed him was when I told him that his mother, we really needed to take his mother to take care of her, and he was not for that at all.
Well, it's
And
kind of ironic because here you are being this very giving, gracious human being, i.e., his wife and the mother of his children, while he and offering to do something that would seem very logical to you, which is you're
Right.
taking care of the generation that you come from, and she needs our help, and it's not even a question. Whereas he sounds like he's resentful, and he's resentful for many reasons, because one is he's not even committed to the relationship from what it sounds like. He's already 1 foot out, if not both. Plus now you're like, and because you probably technically, you sounds like you knew about this, so for you to even offer that up, probably, I mean, who knows, because only he can speak on that.
You're
But
right.
it's kind of like you were facing him off with his own consciousness,
Yeah. But
and
when
we
he
all know that you have to
but,
pay a price for your consciousness and your actions one way or another.
yeah, well, he left me, and I stayed with her for 6 months. After he left, I stayed there with her, taking care of her for 6 months.
In Philly or in
No, in
Texas?
Texas, in Texas.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The night
You brought
that he picked me up and dropped me off the next morning. I never did see him anymore.
That's crazy.
But I stayed with her, and what happened was she began to blame me for him leaving. But because I never had talked to her about what had happened, even before we came back to the States, and she began to blame me. And I was already struggling, trying to make sure that I could get to work, because I worked different shifts, and not having transportation. Because when I didn't have transportation, I had to be sure that I always on a bus line so that I could use the bus, and the bus would take me 2 hours to get to work, 2 hours to get back.
Yeah, and who was taking care of the kids?
And that was it. And so when she began to blame me, and I thought, you know what, I really don't need to deal with this.
No,
I really, truly don't. So I contacted my mother and my aunt, and I told them, explained the situation to them, and I said, "Can I come home? Can we and the kids come home?"
Yeah.
I said, because I need to regroup. I need time to regroup and rethink this thing, and set some things in place.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. I went home. Now, how long his mother stayed in the house, Felicia, I can't tell you after I left, because I called him and told him I'm leaving. And I don't know when he went back to the house to see about her. I have no clue, because I never ever saw her again. Never again.
Did she pass away down there?
No, she passed away. He eventually went and got her and took her back to North Carolina, because that's where she was originally from.
Wow.
I never heard anything else from her. Never ever again.
And you never heard what happened effectively?
And it was quite some time before I even know when she had passed away.
So interesting. Isn't it interesting how people function or don't function through a process of events, and take away all of the other elements that would have been let's face it, early 60s, being a mother of 2 children, being a Black female in the US, you don't even have your own rights. You don't have voting rights. You can't, the fact that you could even have a job, when we both know, you better than I, the struggles that took, let alone caring for your kids, now going through a breakup of a marriage, and then being denounced in a way from the woman who was your mother-in-law on top of it, which by the way reminded me a lot of similar things. And this is unfortunate, and it's just heartbreaking that my mom and you never met, which is just absolutely nutty in and of itself. But my mother was blamed for many things that related to my father, and down to right after he passed away in front of her, and was blamed for his death by my grandmother, his mother. And I always said she was a strikingly beautiful woman who, sadly, had quite a I don't even know what adjectives to describe it as, because it's part of my lineage. but my mom was not treated well for all the things she did and bent over backwards doing. So that part of your share reminded me of that, for what it's worth.
Right.
So you contact your mom and your aunt, and you go back to Virginia to regroup with the kids.
Right.
And so this had to have been, again, the early 60s. Well, this had to have been like 63, 64, something like that.
Yeah, it was in the 60s. It had to be in the 60s. Yeah. It had to be, because the children were still young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then because Kathy went to school in Virginia for a while. Randy never had to go to school in Virginia, but Kathy did. Because I sent the children home. Even after that, the children went back home and stayed one time before. After that.
What do you mean, back to Virginia or Texas?
They went back to Virginia. I sent them back to Virginia because I'm trying to think of what happened, why they went back. And Kathy that it was during the time when she had started to school. And she went, but it was, I'm trying to think, because Randy didn't go to school at all in Virginia. Randy went to school all the way through in Texas.
Huh.
Yeah.
But he was going back and forth with you to Virginia.
To Virginia, yeah. But it was never the time when school. It was always the time when school was out.
Interesting. Got it. Yeah, because he has described the summers in Virginia.
Yeah. And that's it.
On the plantation and what have you.
Yeah. And I finally made a decision, because I was tired of the transferring back and forth, and I began to realize what effect it was going to have on the children. So I finally told my mother and my aunt, I said, I need to get back to Texas, and I need to get the children back and get them stable. And I did just that. I had connections, I had friends, I called, and I set up to find a place to live. And that was before I even left Virginia to go back to Texas. And praise be to God, I found a place to live. We took the bus, went back to Texas, got the place to live, called, and my husband had put all of the furniture that we had previously, put it in storage. And I found out where he had put it in storage, and I called to go to pick up the furniture, And when I called the place, and the man told me, he says, ma'am, I'm sorry, but we just sold everything because your husband never paid the rent he never paid the rent. And there I was stuck with a place to live, because it was an unfurnished place, but no furniture at all to put in the house. And I had furniture that I had purchased in Germany as well, that I had been brought back to the States. That was another devastating time for me. But guess what? I said, I rose up above that, and I said, well, I had to tell the individual who I was going to rent the furnished place from, I have to find a place that's already furnished. Mm-hmm. And they understood. So that's what I did. I found a place that was furnished. And that's where the kids and I moved in, a place that was furnished. And because I was still determined that I was going to get them stable, I was going to make a home where they were going to be stable, and always know that, they had somewhere to live. Yeah. I would never put them in that position. And then from there on out, that's when I began to just move in certain circles in certain ways, and looking for jobs. And I found a job I worked at a bank for 8 years. I had, when I worked at the bank, uh, I had never used a calculator.
Mhm.
But when I worked, my first job at the bank was sorting checks. And that was okay because I learned a lot about people, about their lives when I was sorting their checks.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. And I worked that for 8 years. And then I left there. And as a matter of fact, I became an officer of that bank. I became a bank officer, and I was in charge of front lobby services. I took care of new accounts, and I took care of safe deposit boxes. And then,
Well, and so I mean, this is an interesting thing too, is clearly since again you were a little girl, responsibilities was a part of your core. Being responsible, taking on responsibilities, it was like the footprint to who
mhm,
you would become. And it's interesting because being with your son for as long as I've been now, I don't know, 22 years or something,
mhm,
he is definitely the product of his mom being somebody who gets recognized for responsibility, takes on responsibility, just is that person who just shows up that people know they can depend on. And I think
mhm,
that that is because of you, because of you, even through all these trials and tribulations, kept solving problems, kept facing adversity, kept getting through it, even if it wasn't in the most ideal circumstances, what felt like at the time, but you ended up again rising up to those occasions and proving that you were not going to be taken down, that your children were not going to be without a home, without money, without food, with whatever. Even if and I don't know, that could have predicted ending up working in a bank versus the medical field, or going through all these shifts, or finding a home and finding out that your furniture was so, like, I would imagine, and this is a question for you, through all of these things, did you ever go through the experience of feeling betrayed or let down or questioning the why? And not like in a victimy way, just in a sense of these very human questions.
uh, I felt betrayed. I really and truly did. And it hurt. It really hurt because Felicia, I love being married. I love being a housekeeper. I loved having it. And even when talking about me crying when I got pregnant with Randy, I got past all of that, and I just love my children. I love raising my children. But I had to make a decision that I had still had two children to raise, okay? And I was not going to let them down because they had already gone through enough, and I was not going to let them down. So I put all of that behind me. Now, I made an attempt 4 times to get back with the children, their father. And I finally made the decision that it wasn't going to work because what I was doing it because of the children. That was the primary reason. But I finally gave up on that, and I thought, you know what? I'm not even going to try anymore. And I just went on about my business, doing what I had to do, taking care of the kids. We had to move several times and whatnot, but I always made sure that my children had a home to live in. And we never lived in an apartment complex. I'll never forget one time a friend of mine told me, she said, why don't you just move into projects? And I said, I got news for you. It's one thing I will never do. I will never live in the projects. I will always be in a house where my children would have a yard, a front and a backyard that they can play in. And I just moved on, and I moved on. And then I kept moving on and kept moving from one job to another until I found a job that I knew that was going to give me enough money to be able to really and truly take care of my children, that I wouldn't have to have the lights turned off, the water wouldn't have to be turned off, and I would always be able to pay the rent. I just made that decision that that's what I was going to do.
Well, I definitely think that Randy and I were raised by two women who had the similar intentions against all odds. Because as again, I sit here and I listen to you, and part of me is really trying to keep it together from crying. And I'm not laughing at me, I'm laughing at the fact that, you know, when you homesickness, like I was that kid who would get homesick and would just be crying all the time. And crying is not a difficult thing for me, as I think you know, being your daughter-in-law. But it's because I'm sensitive to the stories being shared that it means so much to me that you're sharing. And you know, my mom was my hero. My mom, through all adversity, how she kept it together to raise three young children after lots of struggle with my father over 20 years, and then having the courage to divorce, not because she didn't want to keep a marriage together, but because of the circumstances that they went through together as a couple, and be it both, unfortunately, abuse and financial and just all those things combined, just too much. And once he got divorced in our family, my father lost our businesses and then died 5 months to the day of all of that, all combined.
Mm-hmm.
How she, like yourself, you know, she was making, I think, all of $8,000 as a public school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And our house was attached to an SBA loan, a small business loan. And my father died with no life insurance. And just again, you know, being up against the wall and having to make decisions of how you're going to forge ahead and how are you going to, you know, keep the roof over your head and pay the bills and keep the job and keep the kids safe and, you know, provide. Like you two were like very, very similar on your paths. Mm-hmm. Again, why it breaks my heart that the two of you never met each other. Just, so, you know, listening to that part of your story, just really, I mean, I know how much I love you and I know how much I always love engaging with you. But you sharing this story with me and filling in a lot of details that I didn't know up till now, even though I've known you for 22 years, means a lot. It's because it's part of what, you know, Kathy and Randy come from and who they taught were, you know, who they had the opportunity to learn to strive and thrive from. You know, just the foundation of what they come from is very telling of why they've become the people that they've become. That's what I think. I am so passionate about this conversation with my mother-in-law, Jacquelyn Tonsall, because I look at her, like so many women of her era, as pioneers, courageous pioneers who had no support lawfully as humans, as females, in her case as a black woman from the South, a black woman who ended up taking charge of her life in ways that many didn't or couldn't or had or were held back and fearful. This is a woman who I hold up and I want to shine with. I want to shine her light. I want to show who she is, because if it weren't for people like Jacquelyn, women all over the place would not have the freedom to speak up, to be showing up, to be who they are, and that we need to look around. We need to be clear that these women that came before us, as we wrap up Women's History Month, is the women of the 80s, 90s, and 100-year-olds right now. These women are the women that set the journey, the path for so many others to follow, for so many others to come into their own, because we haven't had to deal with the things as much as we think we have. If it weren't for women like Jacquelyn Tonsall, I promise you, her courage has led the way. So join me next week as we continue this amazing conversation and dig a little deeper and reveal a little bit more. I'm really excited for you to join me around the campfire. Thank you so much. See you next week. Bye for now.
Yeah.
And that's where my faith, I had to learn how to develop my faith, because it's my faith that has allowed me to be able to do what I have done and what I'm capable of doing. It was not, it didn't have to do with anything else. It was just my faith. And
Right.
so, and that's why, and I'm maturing each and every day. And I have always said that I am never going to grow too old to stop learning.
This week, part 2 with my mother-in-law, Jacquelyn Tonsall, is so incredible, the conversation that we have. It really is something to listen to a woman who's 86 years old, Black female from the United States, and all the life things that she's experienced and the lessons she has to share based upon her reflections and life experiences. It really is something that is so prevalent today with all the things that we're witnessing on a day in and day out basis in the news and in our society. I really look forward to you listening in and hearing what you have to think. Tune in, hold on, grab a seat, lean in, join us around the campfire. I can't wait for you to hear part 2. So, and for you, over all those years, you became, part of the bank. You became an officer of the bank. You stayed in Texas, between San Antonio. Eventually, you moved up to Houston, right? Eventually.
Right. Yeah, I didn't move to Houston until after I had retired. As a matter of fact, when I retired, remember, I retired in 1993. I didn't move to Houston then. I moved to South Carolina. I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, because I lived in Charleston for 5.5 years. And by that time, the children were they were already established. So.
Right. And I didn't know you then. Matter of fact, I must have met you right after you moved back to Texas, because we met in 1999.
Right. Well, then the reason that I made the choice to move to South Carolina was my sister lived in South Carolina. And I really and truly, because remember, I went in the military when I was 18 years old. So my siblings, I didn't know anything about my siblings. And I didn't want to go back to Virginia to live, but South Carolina was close enough, because there's only 300 and some miles from South Carolina, from Charleston back to my hometown, Richmond, because everybody lives in Richmond now. And that's when I made the decision to move back. And then the only time I lived with my mom was the time when I lived on the plantation. I only lived with my mother for 4 years. before I went in the military. Because, see, my grandparents raised me.
And may I ask why your mom wasn't raising you
My
versus
mother
your
did not,
grandparents? Go ahead,
right.
I'm sorry.
My mother did not raise me because my stepfather did not want me. Uh, I never got the true story, Felicia, of my birth. Okay, but evidently, when I was born, my mother was married to my stepfather, and so evidently, I must was a product of an affair. So he never ever wanted me. So that's how come my grandmother and my grandfather that raised me. I was raised with my aunts and my uncles.
And then were your brothers and sisters, all of the 10, including the 2 stillborn, were they all from the same man, from the same?
They were all from my stepfather. Yeah.
And
No, I take that back. There's another sister who died here a couple of years ago. She was also a child that evidently my mother had an affair and had her. But and another family took her. She was raised by another family in the county. Yeah.
so being with your mom for those only 4 years of your life up to a certain point in time, how was that relationship for you? How did you feel about her?
Well, you know what? I had been loved so much. I had so much love from my grandparents, my grandfather, and my grandmother, and my aunt and uncles. Uh, they they were like my sisters and brothers more like than aunts and uncles. So I didn't miss out on anything.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna tell you the reason why. Because when I did go to live with my mother, my stepfather couldn't stand me. But you know what? Uh, with the mindset that I had, I said, you know what, tit for tat, I can't stand you either. But I'm not going anywhere right now. That's it. Okay. That was just the point. And before he died, he told me one day, he says, and he never apologized for what the way that he was, but he told me, he says, I look at you now and see what you have done with your life, and I'm really proud of you. And
So crazy.
I thank you. But come to find out, his children, he had messed up over their lives so badly that all of them, every one of them, disliked him to a certain point. And that's when I thought, Lord, I am so grateful that I had
Mhm.
grandparents who raised
Mhm.
me, loved me.
Mhm.
And so I have no regrets whatsoever. And
Mhm.
I got to meet my father when I was in the military. I had come home for a day pass and I needed a ride back. I don't know how he found out about it because my aunt's husband, Sammy, used to always take me back across the river. And he came and said, I heard that you need to get back to the base. I would like to take you. And that's when he began to tell me that, I'm your father. And somebody had told me, as a matter of fact, they had done it in such a way that it was so ugly. But you have to, I was a child, honey, that had a mind. I had a mind of my own, okay? Yeah, you develop this, uh, what I don't know what you would call it, but I would say, I know who I am and I don't give a hoot whether you care or not. That's just the way it is.
Well, it's tenacity and it is clarity and it is knowing in your heart who you are and that
Right.
nobody's going to take your flame out or down no
Nope.
matter what, no matter how many times they try or how many challenges. And that's an interesting thing because I find, JT, that some of the greatest, most gracious, most biggest hearted people that I know, including you, and this is going to sound weird, but including myself,
Come on. That's all right. Come on.
um, go through some really crazy
Yeah.
moments in time that when people, I mean, I'd even say right now I'm at this crux of my, like I love like this, doing this with you to me is like the most amazing opportunity to create connection, conversation, share this conversation with people. Nobody's holding a gun to my head. Nobody's paying me to do this. I'm
Right.
doing this because I'm passionate about people. This is what I've always been ever since I was a little girl, curious by nature, not in a snoopy way, in a really like open my eyes, open my heart, and share it with the world kind of a way, because I think your story is important. And this is why I loved talk shows when I was a little girl. I loved
Right.
entertainment. I loved learning. I loved
Right.
entertainment, but I love people to the core. What I also think on the other side of loving people that I think is so nutty is how extraordinarily challenging human beings can be to one another.
Yes.
And painfully destructive to one
That's
another.
that's very true.
And how, I mean, as we sit here and talk, we know of a war going on abroad, between the Ukrainians and the Russians. We know that in our conversation that you, in 80 plus years of life, you've lived through civil rights, women's rights, voting rights,
Yes.
working, ability to work and have your own name and your own paycheck and own your own home, have your own bank accounts, education, segregation, just like the toilet paper roll list goes on, and how people can be so fearful and insecure that they have to actually spew their toxicity onto the next human being who might just be light and grace.
Come on.
And it baffles me daily and never should, because at this point I should be like, well, of course. And I might be, but at the same time, it's like, you just want to go in and go, excuse me, and I'm going to say this and forgive me. What the fuck? Sincerely, who the heck do you think you are that that's okay? And it's not a judgment. It's a question. It's a question of humanity. And I get that. Why waste one's time and why waste one's energy and forge ahead? And God knows, I've done it. You know that about me. I know that about you. We're two separate generations. We have different life stories, but a lot of, we're interconnected. We're family. We're, all the things. And it still makes me go, and I've said this and I see this in my industry. You can show up being kind, responsible, gifted, willing, capable, of value, appreciative, or appreciate the opportunity, and still can get backhanded.
Yes,
Does that
you
make
can.
sense?
Yeah. Oh, yes, because I've experienced it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I want to, it's not about talking about a negative. It's talking about reality of how one does make a conscious choice to keep getting up against all odds and to not let those energies get in your way, and what mindset and belief systems it takes, because I don't know that we get to choose who we're born to or how we're born or what we're born like and where we're born. But it's what we do while we're here in this illusion of who we are, right? What we
Right.
do with that, how much does it really matter? Does it matter? I don't know. We're both women of belief. And that's a philosophical question. You know, I know I made an unconscious decision that I wasn't conscious of until years after, that when my father and mother broke up and all the things happened with the family business and my father died, I know that I didn't know then, but I realized years and years later that I must have unconsciously made a decision at that time, at 15 years of age.
Right.
What's the point if everything can just be pulled out from under? Now, with that said, I still said to my mom, you better get me out of here if I'm going to become something. So I did ask for another chance within that year, and God love her, when at 42, I don't even know how she was keeping it together against all odds. She somehow found me the way to get away and get an education that I could get finance to go get and go forward through those struggles. But I have been a successful kid, just like yourself. I was well read. I was, getting a great education. I was doing well in school. I was doing well in all my supporting things. But I made a decision at that moment with all the things that went down. I didn't know anybody had gone through those things. That's not a victim-y statement. I just didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody I could turn to. I mean, I don't even think my grandparents, as stable and foundational as they were in our lives, even knew what to say and do, because they hadn't gone through those things that I was aware of. And all I'm saying is life is about a series of events, and then you have to make a decision, and then you have to put your mind to it, and then you have to go forward, and no matter who comes at you or what comes at you, you have to keep going. I'm going to get back up. I'm going to get back up. I'm going to get back up and prove and be of inspiration and empower and be the example. Again, this is why I started this podcast, because my story is no different than your story. Your story is no different than mine. Different time, different place, different events. But we all have a story of examples to show that if I did it, you too can do it. If I got through it, you too can get through it. And that's big, big, big on my platform of, how I choose to teach. Some people just blatantly say they're a coach, or some people just blatantly say they're a healer, or some people just blatantly say that they stand up in front on a pulpit. This is my pulpit, for no better term, of bringing people together to show what they've overcome, to show what they've succeeded in, but to hear the whole backstory, because it's not just, diamonds and flowers and, yachts and whatever. That's just not life. It may be part of the benefits of somebody's life, but you don't know the whole story of how they arrived at whatever those great things are. And greatness comes in all different shapes and sizes and all different things for each and every person. Do you not agree?
I agree. It definitely does. We use the term of those dashes in between the beginning and the end. There's a whole lot of stuff that happens during that time.
Right. That's where the content is. That's where the story is.
That's it.
Yeah, it's not the award you're winning on a red carpet. It's, so to speak, as an illustration. Yeah, it's not the book signing deal. It's all of the things that led up to you, grinding through a lot of rejection, a lot of being, I don't like using the term beaten up, but, scraping your knees. How about that? And the willingness to get past your own, because it takes this, to me, this is the strongest muscle, is the mind.
It is, because that's where it all starts.
Yeah,
it
really does. It really does. I know that you are, certainly a devout practitioner of your religion and your belief in God.
Yes, I am. Yes, I
Yeah,
am. And that has developed over the years, but the foundation came from my grandparents.
got it.
Uh-huh,
And that's what I was going to ask you. Was it how much was that in your childhood versus how much it was developed over time?
Well, it was everything because honey, I was in church every Sunday, in Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, we were in church during the week, okay? And
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget, I said that when I get old enough to get out into the world and I can make my own decisions, I will never ever go to Sunday school again. Okay.
Ah,
Oh
and
yes.
why
But
did you make that decision? Because you were always there?
I was always there, okay?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but after some other things that happened in my life and I began to mature, okay, I found out that that was the best place for me because it was a learning experience, even in the
Mm-hmm.
church. That was when I learned about the church and what the church was all about. That was Sunday school.
Yeah.
And that's when my faith, I had to learn how to develop my faith because it's my faith that has allowed me to be able to do what I have done and what I'm capable of doing. It was not,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't have to do with anything else. It was just my faith. And
Right.
so, and that's why, and I'm maturing each and every day. And I have always said that I am never going to grow too old to stop learning. Okay,
Right.
I'm always teachable. I'm 86 and I'm still teachable. Okay, because I
Yeah.
still don't know everything. As a matter of fact, sometimes I think I don't know nothing compared to what I need to know. But that my grandparents, that was from them. That was that foundation from them. Because see, my mother never went to church like my grandparents did, and the children never went to church. And before my mom died, I had to. She lived with me those 5 years, 5.5 years in Charleston. That was when I really began to know her. I got to really and truly know her. And then what happened when I left Charleston, and as a matter of fact, I was getting ready to come out to California to start living with Randy. And
Mm-hmm.
Kathy found out and she said, "Oh, no way possible. You're going to have to spend 6 months between us. You spend 6 months with me and 6 months with him." And my mom and Randy had said, "Bring grandma with you." Well, we made a trip out there. We made a trip with my mother to see if she would consider moving to California, but we got stuck on the freeway right outside of Palm Springs.
Oh
We
my gosh.
we sat on the freeway for 3.5 hours and we were nowhere close to an exit. Okay, it must have been an accident. It had to have been a fatal accident that had happened. And she was sitting in the back seat of the car and she says, "Is it like this all the time?" I said, "Mama, I don't know. I've only just visited out here. I have no idea." Well, she made the decision from that day, before we even got settled in Los Angeles, that she wasn't coming out there. So that's when I took her back to Virginia. And then I started to back in the 6 months back and forth. But some things came up with the family members that she was living with, and I had to go. And as a matter of fact, I went back to Virginia, stayed 7 months with her. I packed up and rented a house, my cousin's house, with her. And I'll never forget one morning, it just came over me. Why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
What has she done for me? Why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this? But by the grace of God, I had I captured that thought and I threw it away. I said, because she's my mom, because I found out that my mother was the most humble, precious, sweetest, compassionate person that I could have ever known. Because she was always taking care of somebody and she had a rough life. And she stayed married to my stepfather for 50 some years. And I remember asking her, how did you do that?
Mm-hmm. And what was her answer?
She said, I just knew that was just something I had to do. But in the meantime, like I said, when I went in, I had to go to Virginia and get her, and I brought her to Texas with me. And she didn't want to come, but the situation at home was she couldn't handle that anymore. And
Yeah.
so I brought her to Texas with me. And that's when I found out that she really and truly had not been going to church. She had not, her faith had not matured like mine, because she had not had the teachings. Because
Mm-hmm.
we are taught this, and then we have to receive it and know what to do with it, and allow our faith to grow by the things that we experience in our lives. And she hadn't done it. She only lasted 2 months. But in those 2 months, I got to have time with her, spend time with her, and we became so very, very close. And I know when she passed away from this earth, because she was very, very confused about church. She
Mm-hmm.
really true, because she had gotten into uh, another what do you call it? She had gotten into another denomination.
Mm-hmm.
We were raised Baptist, but she had gotten
Mm-hmm.
into another denomination, and she was so confused because she had a basic knowledge of church, but she had
Yeah.
never followed through with it.
Yeah.
And but when we began to talk, and it was God who allowed me to be able to come with her, and we began to come together on what church was all about, what religion, what our faith is all about, because that's what it is. And before she left this earth, I know that she had come to really and truly know who God is in her life. Because my mother had a hard life. I mean, a hard life. I had an uncle who was in the Navy for 30 years, and he never married. He never got married. But when he died, that's when she discovered that he had made her the beneficiary of his retirement, an annuity. She got an annuity for 22 years from him, because when he would go home on leave, because he was out at sea, he was on the ship the whole time that he was in the Navy. But
Mm-hmm.
when he would come home, he had to make sure that he would always have money to get back to his ship. And he would
Mm-hmm.
give it to my mother, and my mother would keep it until it was time for him to go back. And he saw what a hard life that she had and how honest that she was. So he had set this annuity up for her, which she got for 22 solid years. And then he had an insurance that she also got. And it gave her a much, much better life, because my mother had never really worked. She had never had a job outside of the house.
Yeah.
And and she began to have a good life, because those 5.5 years that we lived in Charleston, we had a good relationship. We had an awesome relationship. And I was just so thankful to God about that. And then I was thankful to God that she was with me when she passed,
Yeah.
because I found her dead in her bed. She had put one foot on the floor, and her bathroom was right across the hall from her bedroom, and she was getting ready to go to the bathroom. And and we did not know that she had a heart condition, and she died. And I always checked on her during the night. And this particular night, I got up, go to the bathroom, and because we lived in a townhouse, and I always came downstairs, but it was a landing there. It was 3 steps, and then there was a landing, and then there was about another 11 steps down. And when I got to the landing, for some reason or other, I just stopped. But then I continued on, and when I got into her room, that's where I found her. She was on her way to the bathroom.
I think that, as you're sharing this story, that what a great gift it was for you to have this full circle
Yes.
from the time you were born, being given away, so to speak, meaning to your grandparents to raise you, not being raised by her, but to be able to have this completion in your lives together as mother and daughter. And you might have even reversed roles at some point,
Yes.
as this happens. But to have that gift for one another, to be able to have each other, to be together, to complete that relationship, to feel whole and complete. I can't speak for you, but I would imagine that was something for both of you to be able to experience that you didn't have that experience. I'm sure as a mother who had just had you as a child, never wanted to, not raise you.
Yeah, I figured that out. I figured that out over the years because, like I said, but those 4 years that I had spent with her before she came to live with me, I had figured her out already. What a compassionate person that she was.
Mm-hmm.
But she lived with a man who was just totally he was just who he was. Plus, he had an automobile accident that had affected his life so that it had affected his mental state as well, and he had to be put in a mental institution for about 2 3 years. And it didn't help him any because when he came out of the mental institution, he was even meaner than what he was when he went in. And that's what happened to his children. His children got the brunt of all of that. Because see, I missed it because I left and went in the military.
Yeah.
And the sister that I was telling you about that lived in Charleston, I'm 18 years older than she is, and and as a matter of fact, my mother delivered her in the bathroom, and I was down at the big house working that day when the children came running down there to tell me that my mother was on the bathroom and the baby was in the commode. And I had to come home and get her out because my stepfather was just going crazy, running around like a chicken with his head cut off. And I told him, come over here and let's get this baby out of this commode. And I got to know her for a couple of years, and she got attached to me. And I didn't know it for years that she thought that when I left, I had abandoned her.
Oh.
I never knew it, never did know it because she was so young when I left.
Yeah.
But the children, all of them, the boys, because it was two, I had three brothers. It was three boys and it was eight of us all together. It was five of us. And I never knew that she felt that way until years later. But those children, they had gone through some stuff themselves. It really and truly is. And my children, when my children visited there, they experienced some of it.
Yeah.
And Kathy definitely remembers it. And but like I said, that's just the way it happened.
Yeah. But again, I think that for all of the misunderstandings or and it's a perfect example of where we get our communication skills from our foundation of how we've been raised. I think we take this forward into all aspects of our lives, and unless we choose consciously to change that for the better, and I think in your own path, that was, again, consciously or unconsciously, a goal of yours. Why you kept reincarnating, so to speak, and evolving, but yet to your true core were the sweet, compassionate, empathetic person you were. You got to see who you came from. That was exactly that as well.
Right.
And why you are who you are, so that being your truth, your foundation. And it's interesting because through all of your journey, starting as a young girl and becoming a young woman and a mother and going through your your divorce and going through your evolution of your career and then retirement and your moves throughout the South, And being that you've been in Texas, since your retirement base and since going forward, you certainly have seen a lot. You've seen history in its own way, not repeating itself, but having its own secular kind of events, whether it's again through the 60s, seeing all these 60s and 70s, all these things being fought for that were overcome, whether it was your belief system or not, but hopefully for greater rights for humanity, for Blacks, for women, for a life of possibilities. And then to see more recent times with, Black, through this pandemic, through Black Lives Matter, through, again, women's rights being challenged. Again, you don't have to believe that, and I don't know your beliefs on this, but, I believe personally that women should have the right to make a choice. This is not a religious statement. This is just a right to our bodies to make a choice, because we're faced with so much stuff. I also think women should have the right to have their own lifestyle and have their career, and yet also hopefully have the miracle of having children if they want them, and hopefully having healthy relationships, whether they're marriages, whether they're same-sex marriages, not same-sex marriages, all the things. That's a lot of stuff. And it's enough for us all to just get through life in a happy, healthy way. So my point to your question, my question that I'm leading up to is, as a woman who's lived now 8 decades plus, you're in your 8th decade of life, and all the challenges you've been faced with, and your beliefs, in God and your practice, you've seen greed, you've seen people be treated well, you've seen people not treated well. What is your takeaway, and what would be your message that you would want to, share from your perspective of what matters and what's important, and how you would like to see humanity in this planet going forward, being able to, what you would want to incite as a woman of being 86 at this point, what you've seen?
Well, let me go back to my faith and my belief in God, because that's who I believe in. Okay, I believe in Him, but I do not believe that I am God. And I think that what has happened a lot of it, and with all of these situations, the things that you're talking about, women's rights and this and that and the other, we have to remember God speaks about a whole lot of things, because I read the Bible constantly. I've been studying it for a number of years, and that's how my faith has began to evolve, and I'm beginning to become mature in it. And I also have learned that God is the head, and this is my thinking and my belief, that He is the head of everything. And He put each and every one of us on this earth to do certain things. But there are certain things that's left up to God when it comes to women and their rights and what they can do. They have a choice. There's a choice. We each and every one of us have been given a free will, okay, as to say it. And it's determined by what God's word has said about it. But we're trying to take on God. We're trying to, as people, carnal. We're trying to take on God's position. In other words, and we cannot do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I believe in Him, and I believe in Jesus, but there are certain things that we cannot do, and it's still left up to you. It's still left up to me. We have the free will to make the decision. And then if there's a consequence with it, which a lot of times it is a consequence with it, guess what? We have to learn to bear the consequence. But we have got to stop trying to do what we were never, ever given the basics to do.
So more specifically, like use an example that comes to mind, if I may. Say for instance, you were a tenacious young woman. You had a desire to get out. You had a desire to travel. You had a desire to have a career. You had a desire to originally be in the medical field. And a lot of that materialized in its own organic sort of way. And some of those things, caused it's like there was some struggle and there was a lot of great rewards for your choices. So, for women at large who in many cases have to be breadwinners, in many cases are single moms, in many cases have been up against some crazy struggles through, whether it's abusive relationships or affairs or socioeconomics or discrimination, not every woman, could say, oh my God, I'm going to be a survivor of domestic violence, or, oh my God, I'm going to be a single mother. I never saw that coming. Or, oh my God, I never thought that while being pregnant, I'd have to make a choice to make a decision based upon what I'm being faced with. And as a woman who is devout, who has, learned over time your commitment and what have you, and your beliefs are your beliefs, what do you say, if you were counseling a woman or women through these things, what would you find yourself saying to them?
Well, first of all, I am a true believer in follow your mind and your heart. That's one thing. Now, because I am a Christian and I believe in God and what God's word says, and I believe in Jesus, I will not push that on anybody.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not up to me to do that.
Yeah.
And
but as woman to woman, like woman to woman, like what you do with me, because we believe different beliefs and what have you, but you've always been very endearing to me and very much a listener and so forth. And we may not agree to agree, but you still very much are present with me. Yeah. As I'm sure you are with many.
And that's exactly what I do. I'm not one to condemn. I'm not one to condemn anybody for anything. Okay. Mm-hmm. You have to understand. People go through things, and they go through a lot of stuff that you have no idea about, and you could possibly, if you had to think about you going through that, it would be horrifying. And you have to always remember what that person has gone through and how they have been able to deal with it. My thing is to always be there to listen to that person, to hear what it is they have to say, to give them comfort, okay? Speak comforting words to them. Let them know that there's somebody there who cares about them, but not trying to push something down your throat.
That's a great lesson.
And also to let you know that you're loved more than you could ever know.
That's a great lesson.
And let be led by what your heart tells you. And all of us, we know right from wrong and always try to do the right thing.
And let me ask you something. So you talk about listening and you talk about comforting and you talk about love. And let's say somebody does share with you something and in your comforting and in your listening and in your loving, you also share, some of your insight and it doesn't get received and it creates friction, unbeknownst to you, because that wasn't where you were coming from. What do you say to that as a woman who's lived life?
Well, let me tell you this. If you put it out there, okay, that's all I can tell you. You put it out there from your standpoint of view, what you have learned and what you are thinking, and then you let that individual decide whether they're going to accept it or not. And guess what? Move on, because don't allow anybody else get in your space. Okay, that's going to hinder you from doing what you need to do, as long as it is the right thing. I had to learn that the hard way. I was always struggling with what somebody else was going through, and this and that and the other, and all of that. And then I finally decided, okay, I have spoken. And I have given examples of how I have received, how I have come through things, but you still want to hang on to what's going on with you. And you're always the victim, because I got some family members that are still victims.
Yeah.
But Felicia, we all have to grow. We have to become mature. We can't stay babies always. And we always need to have the desire to want to grow, to do better, to be better. And there are going to be roadblocks. There are going to be obstacles. And in God's word, his word says that we're going to have trouble. There's trouble always, as long as we live on this earth. So you either learn how to deal with it, or you just keep messing up. And that's just it. And the decision is yours, because you still have the ability to have free will. You can choose to do it right, or you can choose to do it wrong.
Yeah.
But the choice is yours.
Yeah. And that everybody is going to, you're not going to be everybody's favorite person, and you're not always going to align, and you always, no.
No, that's not going to happen. And to be honest, the truth with you, I don't want to ever be like that. Okay.
Yeah.
I like I said, because I just bring a whole lot of stuff on me. I already was loaded down. I had all of these cares and concerns that I was dealing with, and then I was still trying to deal with somebody else's stuff too.
Yeah.
But I had to learn how to separate it all, but still retain that love, that care, that compassion and whatnot for that individual, and never condemn them. And not only that, a lot of times you just have to totally just turn people loose. Really and truly you do. You just got to get them out of your circle completely.
It's a really big life lesson, I think, for a lot of people, no matter what their scenario is.
That's it.
And I think that that's a lesson that sometimes it's not even I think a lesson. I just think it's how people, how you evolve through life, and you ebb and flow in and out of these worlds of individuals. And as more gets revealed, do you have to come to a decision of, is this good for me or not? Right?
That's it.
And that happens in your career, and that happens in your personal life, and that happens in general. And that never stops as long as you're breathing.
No, ma'am, it does not stop. Because I tell you, after divorcing the children's father, I didn't even think about having dating or anything for 12 years, because children were in school, and my primary goal was for them to get out of school. Mm-hmm. And also setting the path for them to be able to get out and able to sustain themselves. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I decided, now I can breathe and I can take that time. But it was always this thing it took me some years to realize that I never wanted to grow. I never wanted to grow old by myself. Mm-hmm. That's why I married my second husband. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, what a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But honey, I lasted that marriage lasted what, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I found, like I said, it was just going around in circles, and I decided I don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
I got out of it. Didn't
Yeah.
have any I had no qualms about it whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I couldn't even tell you if he's dead or alive.
Yeah.
Because when I stepped out, I mean I stepped out.
Yeah.
Then it was years after that before I picked the third husband. And he was a great guy. I met him because I was able to go to a junior college, and that's where I met him, going to night classes.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a great person until I found out this man had so many different bloodlines in his body until he didn't know who he was himself.
Mm.
And when I said put me through literal hell, he did.
Mm.
And then I made the decision, okay, you know what, Lord, I am not by myself. I'm never ever by myself. I don't need a man to be with me. I'm not alone at all. So when I finally made that decision and I got that man out of my life, that's when I decided, you know what, I can stand being alone or living by myself, because I'm never ever alone. I'm always around people. And then when I do encounter some that were acting just like those two husbands were, I could always step away from them. And
Right.
I made that decision. Get these people out of my life, get them out of my circle, and move on.
Right.
Because again, I didn't even know that he had died until a friend of mine sent me a notice that she saw his obituary in the paper. And see, I could have been still hanging on to that premise that I didn't want to be alone, and just trying to just hang on and,
Right.
and be so worn down that I wouldn't be any good to myself or anybody else.
Right.
And so now I have come to that conclusion that I can handle it. I can handle it. I can handle it by the grace of God. And I have some good people in my life.
No, there's no question you have good people in your life, and it's interesting. So you talk about the marriages. Regarding relationships in your career or in your personal life, on a female to female, woman friends, or have you ever been faced with relationships that you also had to make a choice to say, this isn't good for me, this isn't healthy, it's unbalanced, whatever? Have you?
Yes, ma'am, I have. And I mean close relationships that I stayed in for quite a long time, and relationships where I really thought was good for me, until one day I woke up and found out, I do not need this. I really and truly, I have learned in my life, I never want to be a negative thinking person. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have too much to be thankful for. I have too much that has been given to me, and I don't need to be negative about anything, because I have the ability to make the choice to do what it needs to be done or not to do it. And I always make the choice. I always say, I take life. I'll always want to have a good life, an abundant life, an
Yeah.
enjoyable life.
Yeah.
And I do.
Well, so I mean, but they've still been lessons for you one way or another, don't is because it's a process.
It is a
And it is
process.
a learning process. And I think, we go into life, relationships, open-hearted. I mean, unless you're so damaged and so closed off.
Right.
Right. And then I think that when more gets revealed about people, that does not make it wrong or bad. It just means that I have found it to be interesting, because I too have a lot of great people in my life, But I also find it interesting that, you know, you're a very caring woman. You give a lot of your heart. I'm sure you've had to learn boundaries over time.
Yes, I have.
Right?
Oh, yes. Yes, I have.
But you're still going to show up the beautiful human being that you are, and nobody you're going to allow to dim your light. Nope. So that doesn't necessarily mean that all those people are supposed to be in your life, or that you're supposed to give to them, or that they can be threatened by that gift that you just walk in with as you are, who you be, who you were born to be. And that's not something you should have to dim your light for. So I would imagine that there have been times that that has not been always the easiest choice to go, wow.
Yeah, it might not be easy, but it's one that I finally have realized that I can't do it without the faith that I have in God. And right. And that's when my faith begins to mature even much more, because I know when He has given me that ability to do that, and to know and discern when it's something that is not good for me, even though I would still like to be connected to it, that I need to turn it loose. And that is even some good friends. And there are some good people, but still in all, they don't have the same, they don't think the same way that you do. They don't feel the same way that you do. And because of that, I don't need to be, I really and truly don't need to be in that environment. Right. So I have to step away from it. And do I regret it? It'll bother me, but it's not going to, it's not going to dim, like you said, it's not going to dim my light. I'm not going to allow it to. I'm not going to allow it to.
So, you know, as you look at your life and how it's evolved, and where you're at today, are you happy with how things have, you know, where you are, how you evolve, where you've landed at this point in time?
Yes, ma'am. You know? I am delirious, okay? I am just totally delirious, even with my body that has been, you know how your body deteriorates. It does. Stuff comes on it that you try to think, where did this come from? But even with that, I'm still okay. I am still okay. In this process that I was going through with the physical therapy, it has changed my life so until I'm making a total change in lifestyle. Okay. Yeah. And I'm getting ready to send a note to my therapist to let her know that because I had one of the best young woman. She was from Cuba, and she was so compassionate, but she had skills that was unreal. And she had so much patience with me. And she wanted to make sure that I was getting it right, and it was affecting me. And it has made all of the difference in the world with my body and my thinking and everything. I'm getting ready to write a note to her job to let them know what she did to me and how she did what she did to cause me to know that I had to make a lifestyle change. And because of that, I'm making a lifestyle change, and my body is totally, totally different. Does it still hurt? Yes, Lord. Because some days it still hurts. And does and I'm still doing the exercise because she gave me an app that I have on my phone. I couldn't get on the floor, Felicia. I couldn't get in the bathtub and get out. I'm doing exercises on the floor. You hear me?
Yes.
And I can, and she even taught me how to get up off of the floor. I've learned how to not bend over, pick up something, how to squat to get it. That's just a lifestyle change. That's all it took. I have learned these things, and it has made so much difference in my life. So yes, I am totally, like I said, I'm just delirious of what's going on.
So in that, and you know, getting to this point where we've been on this call for probably close to 2 hours.
Right.
We could probably do another 2 hours, but I won't do that to you. In wrapping it up, basically, and speaking of how you're delirious and your perspective on life, you know, if you were to be, you know, if we're not choices, but, you know, money's important, health is important, family is important, friendship's important, belief is important, mindset's important. What would be, you know, what would be your passion and purpose in life, your legacy? What would you say out of those things? Is it all important? What do you know, what would be again, a lesson that you would want to leave or inspire, whether it's young women, young children, you know, what have you? What would be a statement that you would want to state that you would like as a legacy statement?
And that is, if it's mostly I've been talking about me. Okay. All righty.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm talking about me, of what I've gone on, so that I can express it to somebody else, that I have been able to accomplish this, but it was not because I was by myself. I have had help along the way. And I pray that somebody who is affiliated with me, or has seen me, or has walked by me, or walked with me, or seen me, that I have been able to affect their lives in some way, and let them know that whatever they need to do, that they are able to do it. You just need to, first of all, you need to have confidence in yourself. You got to like yourself. And I like myself a whole lot. I really truly do. Once you become to the point where you love you, then you are able to do whatever else needs to be done. And I pray that I will have had that type of an effect on those around me. I want that to be my legacy, because it wasn't all about me. I went through this for it to be passed on to somebody else, that their lives will be made better. And that's what I try to do every day, is to make somebody else's life better.
I love that. I mean, that was like cannolis and spumoni ice cream, pizza and bagel and lox, like all wrapped up in one.
All wrapped up in one. I know what you're talking about. Yes, I do. Yes, indeed.
That was so good, JT. I love that. And it's, you know, self-love and confidence.
Gotta have it. Gotta have it. Because if you, and I think that's what happens to a lot of people and what's going on in this world. They don't love themselves. They don't know how to love themselves. And when you don't know how to do that, you really don't know how to reach out to others. And until you get to that place where you have that confidence in you, and you like and love who you are, and then you can always express it to somebody else. Because, honey, we got some stuff going on, Felicia, that I never ever thought. And I have seen some stuff, because I went through those bad days, the segregation and all of that, not being able to go to a counter and sit down and order something. I've gone through all of that, going to a theater and having to go up in the top of the theater in the balcony, and not only that, had to go through the back door to get up there. I have been through all of that, but I went through all of that, and I appreciated that I did go through all of that. But now my life is so much better. It is so much better, and I like myself so much more. And then I love people. I'm a people person. I don't, and talking about being alone, and I was saying because I wanted to be married because I thought I was going to grow old alone. I am never alone. I am never alone. And I appreciate that. And then I have you in my life, and I have Randy, and I have Kathy in my life. And that's the icing on the cake, okay?
Oh, wow. We're the lucky ones.
I'm telling you, when I stop and think about Randy, what the periods that he went through, and I stop and think about the periods that Kathy went through, and I had to stand strong in each and every one of them, never ever giving up, always saying, I love you. Always saying, because a thing that I always told my kids, you can do whatever you want to do, but you just have to have the right mindset to do it.
Yeah.
I have two children who love me dearly, and I love them dearly. I really, I even when I stop and think about all the crying I did with Randy, but then I have done a whole lot of crying with Kathy too. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yes, but there's still tears that come sometimes.
Oh, sure.
But it's how I deal with it.
Yeah.
And I feel now that I have the strength and the will to be able to deal with it because where I am in my life, because I am living a good life.
Yeah, you are.
I really and truly am.
Well, you are such an inspiration to me. And I think just highlighting, because I feel like we've only just highlighted. I mean, we talked about a lot of things, but I feel like they're just highlights because you can't talk about 86 years in a little over 2 hours. There's just no way. Let's call it spade a spade.
That's right.
So, but the aspects of these elements, of these bits of linking all these things combined really is a story of inspiration, really is a story of courage, really is a story of perseverance, really is a story of belief, really is a story of empowerment and choice and making decisions to keep getting up, to keep going forward, to keep believing in your truth, to continue to shine your light, and to be of again, you're a servant leader for no better term in my book of who you represent in my book, besides the fact that you're my delicious mother-in-law, that is just really just somebody that I think that hearing your story and knowing who you are is a gift of a human being, is a gift of somebody that I think is a treasure and to be treasured. And that I hope that you do touch many people's lives through not only hearing this story, but I know that you touch a lot of people's lives. That's why people want to be around you and with you and get from you and so forth, to the point where I know that you've had to figure out how to persevere and preserve all at the same time. But I just love you. I love you for taking the time to share with me. I love you for taking the time to, maybe we'll sit down and have another 2-hour conversation, because we both know we're good at that with each other. Yes. But we've never had this kind of conversation ever. And I love it. And I thank you for even at the very end talking, shared a little bit. I mean, it's one-liners about the reality of things that you have been through, including, having to not be able to sit at the counter and having to sit above and go through the back door. I mean, you're, sadly, of that age of time when you were born. And that's why I asked you early on about your experience in the 50s, being a young woman, getting, your education, getting to be a part of the Army, having to make choices, going through life early on as a single mom, as a Black female in this country where women didn't have voting rights, let alone Blacks didn't have voting rights. So it's like, it's interesting because when I talk to a lot of young women who are pretty much like 40 and younger, I don't know what history lessons they've been taught or not taught. But many seem to think that the life that they lead today is how it's always been. And being a product of parents who would now be in their mid 80s and early 90s, and being a product of being a kid raised in the 60s and 70s under the age of 10, did know of what my family and your family were up against.
Right.
And those were very pivotal points in our history of what we lived through today, what we live into today, the reason why you can, knock wood, live a better life than then, and how far we've come, and how going backwards isn't a choice.
That's it. That is it. Talking about voting rights, ever since when you turn 70, you have the ability you have the choice, to vote, mail-in ballot. Well, when I turned 70, I started with the mail-in ballot, and I'm 86 now. So how many? That's 16 years?
Yes.
I've been mailing a ballot. Well, this because we just had primaries here.
Yes.
Guess what? I had requested a mail-in ballot some time ago because they always would send me, a letter, and I had requested a mail-in ballot. Well, guess what? I never received it. And I thought, okay, what's going on here? But I went online, and one of the new laws that they have put in effect here in Texas is the mail-in ballot. They cut it out. Well, I just said, when I found that out, I got off the phone. I said, you know what? I got news for you. I will stand in line to vote. And I went to vote early. I said, I will stand in line, and I don't care how long it will take, because I'm not walking on a cane anymore. And Kathy had bought me this little chair that you can carry along with you. You can sit down. But I didn't even carry the chair with me, and I didn't even take the cane in with me. We stood in line and got up to the voting machine and cast a vote. I said, because I will not go back to where it used to be. I refuse to do that. I don't care how many laws that they pass. Because it's the mindset of man that begins to think that they're God, and they're not. And they'll do everything in their power that they can to take you back to where it used to be. But I got news. I'm not going back that way. And so when the election comes up, if I have to stand in line, I will stand in line again. And I have made that decision. I will not, I don't care what's going on, what's in their minds. I will not be deterred. I will not.
I think that's such an important message, JT, because I know that with this more recent laws trying to be passed throughout many states of not making voting accessible, of trying to, make it where people will be, turned away because they won't put forth the efforts because of how challenging it is being made to get their votes in. That they're trying to, you know, in their own way, gerrymander the whole cause and effect. And unfortunately, we have seen in our country since 2016 a very turn of events.
Yes.
A turn of events that I think for decades people never saw coming, including this war that we're witnessing right now.
Mhm.
And the cause and effects that that's going to have on this country, it's already having leading into it. I mean, we haven't seen inflation like this since the 70s. So a lot of people have never experienced inflation. A lot of people never experienced, you know, a lot of things
Right.
that I think that they were either not paying attention to or not staying educated about, or just simply unconscious of the fact that these things are all possible if given the opportunity.
Given the opportunity, that's right.
Yeah, including women's rights as well as voting rights,
Right.
as well as, you know, why we've had the issues with discrimination and, you know, all the things that we're not going to get into I mean, we can, but
You're right.
But the reasons why we have to speak up, stand up. And I do remember I loved, as soon as I turned 18, knowing I had the right to vote. And I remember the very first election I voted for was in the presidential election. And I literally just come from having my my wisdom teeth pulled. So I was like not completely present, but I can tell you that I know exactly who I voted for. And I was proud to have done that at the time. My point to all of that is not about that story. It's about the fact that there's so many people around the world that would give their eye teeth to have the right to vote.
Yes, Lord.
And we have fought for those rights. And
Yes,
we have been given those rights through on the backs of a lot of people fighting for those rights. And the fact that there are people who are going to try to keep that from happening, and the fact that they're trying to make that go backwards, and that our country has swung in this direction that is unrecognizable. And kind of reflective on the world at large right now. Not entirely, but many countries have, you know, tried to swing in directions that if people weren't paying attention could, like, in a flip of a switch,
that's it,
have a new reality, so to speak. And I think that's why we're also seeing this very demonstrative behavior in the world right now. It's like if I can't get my toy, then I'm gonna, you know, do this bullshit. So now you're gonna destroy humanity and a country.
Having temper tantrums.
It's just, you know, when you were talking about Sunday school, like you, I was going to Sunday school every Sunday. And the things that I was witness to, that I used to think, God, did I like imagine this? And it wasn't until I had a conversation with my brother a couple of years back that we both were having the same experience, which was seeing a lot of Holocaust movies. Our family and our household did not talk about it, did not take that heaviness on us. I don't think our families on either side, well, not on either side, but on my father's parents' side, had really gone through that. So there was no conversation about any survivors or whatever. But it was very much a reality that was put before us as little kids in our Sunday school environment, that history could always repeat itself. And do not forget. And if this was in the 40s and now we're being shown this in the 60s, that was only a 20 plus year difference. And it was like, it just happened yesterday, basically. And I think what was so interesting about those childhood experiences, JT, was that none of my peers, none of my little friends were getting the same kind of conversation, other than the kids I was going to Sunday school with. And they happened to be all little Jewish kids.
Mm-hmm.
So my Catholic friends, my Lutheran friends, my Presbyterian friends, my Unitarian friends, my Baptist friends, none of them none of them were hearing these stories or seeing these films. So I used to think, why am I so deep? Why am I so heavy in thought? Why am I so concerned and worried when none of my friends walk this walk?
Well, right.
And also being a little kid whose parents were a mixed marriage, you know, the Sicilian Catholics and the I don't know if my family's from Ukraine or part of the part of Russia, because, you know, Russia doesn't even identify Jews.
Right.
You know, on the passport, you're stamped Jew. It's not. So I'm not even sure, because I've never done our DNA, where exactly they're from. But that side of the family, like that mixed marriage was a marriage that, you know, for all intents and purposes in the 50s was an interracial marriage. Right. And not an acceptable marriage, certainly even within their own households. So I didn't have to be a little Black girl to see discrimination.
Come on. I understand.
Right. And so I learned at a very young age discrimination. I learned at a very young age fear of history repeating itself, why you had to be educated, why you had to speak up, why it was so important to stand for the person who may not be able to voice themselves. And it's interesting going through life that I've personally lived, and going through life that I've continued to personally live, and be somebody who's passionate, and be somebody who's loving and caring, but also feel like somebody who can be very misunderstood very easily for what I take a stand for.
Yes. Talking about that, when I used to visit Randy when he lived in the apartment complex, and his landlord, Jack.
Yeah.
Jack's parents were Holocaust survivors. And I used to have every time I would go to the laundry room, I would always run into Jack. And Jack and I had lots of conversations. And that's when I really and truly began to become aware of the Holocaust and what they went through, the people who were caught in that, what they went through. That's when I made the decision, okay, we are not the only ones. Blacks are not the only ones. Okay. And a lot of people will look at me and say, why are you saying that? Well, I have good reason to say that, because in talking with him, he wasn't in the Holocaust, but his family members talked about it and were very adamant about it, teaching him about it. And he said, and I didn't live in the Holocaust, and I'm thankful that my parents survived it. He said, but I don't want to hear the things that they're talking about, trying to make me feel, like I had something to do with it. Right. And we used to have some long conversations about that. Mm-hmm. And he said, because I want to so badly, he said, I want to go to a Baptist church where I can sit there and sing with the people and holler and shout and carry on. He said, but you know what would happen to me if I would do that? I said, I understand. I truly understand. But that's when I really and truly began to open up. We are not the only people. We are not. And Black lives matter. We do matter. But we are not the only ones who have ever been segregated against and had to go through not being accepted as the people who we are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that has always stuck with me, always
Yeah.
stuck with me. And I've learned to, I've been to a lot of the museums and looked at the atrocities that happened to those people and what they had to go through, and how there are so many who did survive. They did survive.
Well, and I think it's interesting, and one of the many reasons why I thought it was so important for us to sit down today, not only to tell your personal story, but how many aspects of things that you do represent being a woman of your age and what you lived in and the time that you've grown up in, and the importance of the time you've grown up in, also being a Black individual, as well as a Black female, as well as a mother and a career woman, what that magnitude means. And yes, while you are running this path of your life journey, other people's life journeys that really do parallel your life journey, different
Right.
names, different parts of the world, or different but really, and that's why Blacks and Jews have actually really fought. That's why so many Jews stood up for the civil rights,
Right,
because
right.
they knew firsthand.
And what it was all about.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. And the fact that many of these conversations in education, whether it's the history of Blacks or the history of Jews, is being squashed. And it's not just about Blacks and Jews, it's about anybody's history. It could be Indian, it could be Mexican, it could be Chinese, Japanese. I don't care where you come from. Everybody's history, cultural beliefs all matter. And I don't want to, somebody come down and go, no, it's just, one thing that matters. No, we're all living, breathing, entities that matter. And we're only here for a blip.
That's it. And I thank God, because I never thought I'd live this long. But I thank God that I have lived this long. And I'm learning each and every day that we were all made in the same image. We all came from the same Almighty God. We did. The blood runs warm in your veins and my veins. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. And I don't think it has changed color.
No, I mean, and that's the truth. It's like, we need to be colorblind.
Yes.
I don't ask for blindness. I ask for us to be colorblind. I ask for us to be religious and sexually oriented blind. That we all are made of the same things, and dust to dust, ashes to ashes, all those things. I also think that, yes, it's wonderful if you can become, a billionaire, if that's what's important to you, but it's what you do with those billions that's not about being,
that's it.
Right? I think a person without that money can be just as wealthy in their soul and their purpose, if not more so, than those who have endless amounts. I mean, do I think that that's, I think you can be powerful however you choose to be powerful, as long as it's for the good of others and for many.
And that is it. Yes, indeed. Well, I'll tell you what, I have enjoyed this as much as I hope that you have, and I wouldn't have missed it for anything. But because when I received your phone call, I was just waking up, and I looked at the clock, and I said, "Oh my goodness!" And because
I was like, my mother-in-law standing me up.
No, because I had kept all of the information on my phone, the text that you had sent me, and the whole 9 yards. So all I had to do was pull it up. But when I looked at the clock, and then when you were coming, I said, "Oh my goodness," because my time is definitely different from your time. That's for sure. Yeah,
it's confusing that way for those very reasons. No, but boy, this has just been Such an amazing gift of a conversation, JT. I really love you for taking the time to spend it with me. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I cannot wait to produce it, to its final point of dropping it. I imagine it's going to be probably in the next couple of weeks that this will be heard. Thank you so very much. Really, I mean, I know that I know the funny bits of this morning, which I thought was like, oh, is this a test? Is this happening? and I was like, does she really want to do this? I think she wants to do this. Like, where the mind can go.
That's what happens when things go through your mind like that. Yeah.
I was like, shut up already. Like, whatever is going to happen will happen.
That's it.
But honestly, seriously, such a cool conversation, JT. I mean, I don't mean to say such a cool conversation, but really such a gift. Really, you're a treasure. I love you so much.
Well, I love you too. Love you guys. And my son just doesn't know what a treasure he has. And I keep telling him that. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. When I stop and think about how long y'all have been together, because when I go back and think about of 3 marriages, out of all of those 3 marriages, it was never add up to the number of years that y'all have been together, and I just bless God for that. I really truly do. I really and truly do. Yes.
Thank you. I don't know how it's happened, frankly. I mean, meaning all the years, like, it's a one step at a time.
That's what it's all about. That is what it's all about. Yes, indeed. Well, give the grand animals a hug for me, okay?
We will do, for sure.
Okay. All
love
right.
You so much. Thank
love
you.
you both. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
I feel so fortunate to have had this opportunity to sit down with my mother-in-law, Jacquelyn Tonsall. Her experiences in life are something to truly be treasured, and not just because she's my mother-in-law, but because she is a reflection of our society. She is a reflection of over 8 decades of life experiences, of so much history, that if we don't embrace and don't learn from, we will continue to repeat. And we see this on a daily basis through national, through personal, through world platforms. And it's her conversation with me that shares those bits of her story that integrates into all these things. I also look forward to you tuning in next week as I sit down with Jeremy Stars, co-director and owner of Camp Nicolay for Girls, who has an opportunity to share with me his life experiences of growing up in a 3-generation legacy business and how he's helping carry on that legacy to inspire many young women and go forward in life through sharing nature and learning to live together and raising young women up to become powerful participants in this world. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Look forward to hearing what you think. Look forward to you continuing to listen. Look forward to you sharing this platform of mine called Camp Fifi Uncensored, where the spirit is young, the soul is wise, and the life stories are vast. Join me around the campfire where we talk about everything from soup to nuts, or what I like to say, from cannolis to egg in the holes. And don't forget the s'mores. It's a joy for me to have you join me. It's a joy for me to have you sit and listen. And it's a joy for me to have you be a part of this community. Much love. Look forward to you being part of this more going forward. Thank you so much. Bye for now.